Well, I guess it's that time of the year, huh? With the end of the year upon us, it is time for me to rank every game that I beat this year in 2025. Since my ranking of every game I beat in 2024 last year, I've beaten 40 games. And I'm proud to say that they are all good. Even the games at the very bottom of my list, I still think are pretty decent games that I at least had some level of enjoyment with. 2025 was a very strong year in video games for me. I had a lot of fun this year. It was my first year with the PS5, obviously my first year with the Switch 2, it was everybody's first year with the Switch 2, and my first year with my very own podcast, where I got to talk about all of the great games that I played with all of you. Without further ado, let's get into the ranking from 40 to 1 of all the games I played in 2025, whether they came out this year or not. Coming in at number 40 on the list, we have Once Upon a Jester. This is not a super popular game, but it was free on GOG Galaxy sometime really early in the year, back in like January or February. This game was developed by Bonte Avond. They are a Dutch studio, and it was published by Crunching Koalas. In the game, you play as a jester, with a best friend that looks like a sock and is also named Sock, and the two of you have to perform in front of audiences to win the rights to perform at the Castle of the Kingdom. The game was really funny. There's a lot of good comedy, but I didn't feel that mechanically it interested me greatly, and at times it felt like it might have been a little bit boring. Overall though, still a pretty decent game. I beat this game on March 9th of this year in about 3 hours. Coming in at number 39, we have Art House. Art House is an extraordinarily short game. That's actually part of the reason I was interested in playing it to begin with, is because it was so short. In total, it only took me 20 minutes on November 21st, making it the shortest game I played this year. Art House is a narrative puzzle platformer developed by Turtlefish Studios. It was published as part of the USC Games program, where the college actually publishes games developed by students at the college. Now, I don't mean any insult by putting it down this low on the list, as I thought the narrative was quite interesting, and the way things tied together at the end were neat. And I can't be too mad. After spending only 20 minutes, it was very little of a commitment. However, I did feel that the level design was obviously quite basic. I'm sure in a full-length game, it could have been far more expanded upon. And, you know, for many people, that's one of the great things about indie games, especially low-budget ones, is that they focus on a single mechanic. But in Art House's case, I feel like its short length does actually hurt the game. Overall, it would probably be a lot better if it could be expanded out a little bit more. And I don't have any specific problems with the game, to be honest. It's really not that bad. It's a good game, but I can't give it a ton of points because it really didn't do a whole lot for me because it was so short. Maybe it's my fault for looking for a game that's so short, but at the end of the day, I still had fun, and here it is at 39. Alright, here's where the pitchforks come out, so bear with me. Coming in at number 38, we have Florence, a game that everybody's actually heard about. This game was actually originally released on mobile devices back in 2018, which is something that I didn't know until after I had beat the game, and in hindsight, really doesn't surprise me all that much that it was a mobile game originally. I played it, of course, on PC, because I bought it for like $1 or something in a sale. Florence was developed by Mountains, not like the geological feature, but the development studio, and was published by Annapurna. Like the last game, it's another indie narrative story-based thing, but this time it's actually more of a visual novel. You follow the story of Florence herself. She's the main character through her daily life and through a pivotal moment in her life. I'm not going to go into the story of the game. I know some people found this game to be very moving, very inspiring. Generally, story's not really the thing that I care most about in video games to begin with, and on top of that, I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of the story. Like, there was nothing wrong with it per se, but these, I guess you could say, cozy games, I know that's what some people like to call them, they don't usually do it for me. That said, I'm glad I played the game. Still a pretty decent game. Some of the more mechanic things, the puzzles and stuff, were a little bit better. None of it was too hard or anything. Didn't really require too much of your brain, and that's okay, I suppose. Overall, though, I think the game is well made, but it's really kind of not my thing, and I couldn't justify putting it any higher on this list. So I'm sorry to all the Florence fans out there. I beat Florence the same day as Art House, November 21st, in about 45 minutes. Coming in at number 37, we have Quiet is the Eyes. Now, if you didn't guess it, this is another narrative, story, short little game that I played this year. You'll notice a lot of them are pretty low on the list. I don't think any of them are bad games, but they're not really my style of game. This game was another one published by USC Games and developed by Ali Guo and Rachel Perry. Quiet as the Eyes takes a horror approach. It is a side-scrolling puzzle game with some pretty brain-engaging puzzles. I actually really liked the puzzles in this game. And the narrative was interesting, I suppose. It wasn't really, like, didn't do a whole lot for me, but I thought it was interesting. Yeah, I thought it was a pretty decent game. Problem is, once again, it's so short that there's really not, like, a whole lot of substance, and I kind of wish that there was more there. I understand that that's probably how this program is designed, but at the end of the day, couldn't justify putting it too high on this list. But it was a lot of fun. I recommend everybody check it out. I beat it on June 1st in about half an hour. Coming in at number 36, we have Behind the Frame, The Finest Scenery. This game was developed by Silver Lining Studio and published by Akupara Games. Like everything else on the list so far, it's another one of those narrative indie things. This time focused around painting and using clues to solve puzzles to help you find items that you can use in the painting. I thought the puzzles and gameplay itself was very well executed in this game, and so while generally I'm not that big a fan of these games because I'm not that huge on the story and that's kind of all there is, like Quiet as the Eyes, this game also did very well on the gameplay side of things, so I had to give it some props here. I think it was pretty good. I got this game for free on the Epic Games Store, and I played it on February 1st in about an hour, 15 minutes. Coming in at number 35, we have Pac-Man World Re-Pac. Unlike everything else higher on this list, Pac-Man World Re-Pac is very much up my alley, in the sense that I love 3D platformers. The problem is, Pac-Man World Re-Pac is a bad 3D platformer. It feels as though they took the original team that designed the Pac-Man arcade game last night in a basement and thrusted them into 2022 and gave them 6 months to learn how to make a 3D platformer. What I mean by that is that the game is incredibly antiquated, poorly optimized, tedious, and just not much fun. It's not just its age, though. There are lots of 3D platformers, like Mario 64, that came out earlier that I like more. Pac-Man World Re-Pac does not have very interesting levels, it has horrible enemies, decent boss fights, bad controls, bad physics, and bad game design. I don't have time to get into the specifics because I want this video to be shorter than the one from last year, so I'll leave it at that. I beat Pac-Man on November 2nd in about 7 hours. Coming in at number 34, we have Sheepy, a short adventure. This game was developed and published last year by Mr. Suicide Sheep. It is a short 2D platformer. It took me just a single hour on May 22nd to beat, that has a heavy emphasis on its music, giving the background of its developer, but also has really strong mechanics and progression. The way you unlock abilities in this game, and how the abilities gradually make you stronger, and then how they're all taken away from you at the very end for the last boss fight, are all ways in which this game demonstrates its cleverness and its great principles of game design. This game's biggest fault is how short it is, because unfortunately, it couldn't have more levels. I thought it was fun for the brief hour that I spent with it. I'd recommend it to everybody, because it's totally free on Steam. This was a great game. At number 33, I have The Last of Us Left Behind. I know some people consider this to be an expansion pack for The Last of Us. It's hard for me to argue that this game is its own standalone game, but at the very least, I think it varies mechanically, and obviously the story is not unrelated, but tied in rather than dependent on the original Last of Us. I think this game can sort of stand on its own, and therefore, I figured that was excuse enough to count it as its own game, because without it, I would only have 39 games this year, and that would kind of suck. I'll talk more about The Last of Us when I rank the actual game, but just know that the story in The Last of Us Left Behind was a great addition to the original game, and I definitely enjoyed that even after I was done with the game, I still had a side thing to go play that was strong in its own right. I beat this game, if you call it that, on February 22nd in 2 hours. I have the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game, which I played on the Cowabunga collection on the Switch. The original version of this game came out in 1989, developed by Konami. Prior to this game, I was definitely not a beat-em-up fan. I had tried to play Streets of Rage before and really wasn't a huge fan. After playing this game and Turtles in Time, which we'll get to later, I actually have quite the interest to try to play some other beat-em-ups. I've tried a couple and got a little stuck, so I didn't beat any others this year besides those two, but I think 2026 could end up being a year for me beating some beat-em-ups, because I've got to say, I really kind of liked the style. Generally, I don't like my games too difficult, but I've got to admit that I had a really good time with TMNT. I beat this game on April 19th in about 45 minutes. At number 31, I have Shadow Generations, which is another game that one could potentially argue is not its own game, but I would argue because of the different character, different level design philosophy, and wildly different mechanics, that Shadow Generations is its own game. It's also about half the length of Sonic Generations, so it's definitely a more convincing standalone game than The Last of Us Left Behind. Shadow Generations had fun levels and awesome boss fights with great spectacle to them, but it also has a lot of filler content like the open world, where the game encourages you to do a bunch of random monotonous tasks that are not at all compelling. So the open world drags the game down a bit. It's also the fact for me that it seems a little bit mindless in a lot of ways, like you're pretty much there just for the spectacle. Overall, Shadow Generations I do not like quite as much as I did Sonic Generations, but it's still a fun game. I beat this game on July 11th in about 6.5 hours. At number 30, this one's pretty controversial, we have Mario Kart World. Mario Kart World has some of the best mechanics in the series. It is the smoothest gameplay out of all of the Mario Kart games. The way the kart controls is completely unparalleled by other games. But the game's initial promise, as it seemed, of a more expansive single-player experience, or honestly just of the experience in general, was, in my opinion, not met. Yes, the open world is a large new addition, with the free roam potentially adding many hours of gameplay for some players. I am not one of those players. For me, the free roam seems like an empty, lazy implementation with hundreds of hours of tedious and completely meaningless added missions. If you're somebody that likes the open world, the free roam mode in Mario Kart World, that's great. I'm happy for you. And you know what? I'll give that Mario Kart World's knockout tour is quite fun. But at the end of the day, it failed on its promise. The open world is rather empty, and it has one of the worst track selections in the modern games in the series. There are some great aspects about Mario Kart World, which is why it's not number 40, but partially out of principle and out of the fact that this was literally the only first-party Nintendo game, unless you want to count Welcome Tour, at the launch of the Switch 2, I'm putting it this low on the list. I'm sorry to the Mario Kart World fans. It also helps that I'm just not a huge Mario Kart fan. I beat this game on July 14th, having beat every CC and every Grand Prix and Knockout Tour in 19 hours, 15 minutes. At number 29, I have Mario Kart 64. Now, of course, I wanted to keep this side by side with Mario Kart World. Mario Kart 64, while I don't think it's as strong in the sense of its controls and its momentum, I think the fact that it's not as smooth kind of adds to the experience in a lot of ways. I'm definitely a bigger fan of the way that older Mario Kart games control than modern ones. That said, I'm still not much of a Mario Kart fan, right? I can recognize that Mario Kart World probably has the better tracks, probably has the better controls, but at the end of the day, I'm a bigger fan of the old games because they do successfully what they set out to accomplish. I'm going to try not to bash Mario Kart World too much because I've done it so many times before, but at the end of the day, I had to put these Mario Kart games somewhere on this list. I definitely came out of Mario Kart 64 having had a much more positive experience, so that's why I put it here. Objectively, Mario Kart World may be a better game. I beat this game on July 4th, having completed all Grand Prix on all CCs in 4.5 hours. For the 15% of people that have not yet been offended, I will now be putting Super Metroid at number 28. Now look, 2025 was the year that I was first introduced to Metroid on a large scale. In the past, I've played little bits of Metroid games here and there. And Super Metroid has been a game that on many occasions I've tried to play and got incredibly frustrated time and time again for multiple years. I find the game to be very cryptic, and I know that there's a lot of people out there that'll be like, oh, well, that's just how Metroid works. You've just gotta kind of get used to it, all this stuff, right? I started with Metroid Zero Mission when I actually went to beat the games. Then I played Fusion. Then I played Super Metroid. Super Metroid was my least favorite of all three. I thought it felt the most outdated in the sense that it was just impossible to figure out where to go. I will at some point make an entire video talking about my opinions on Metroid because I know that they are quite unpopular. So if you have any further questions for me about Super Metroid, I will be happy to answer them in the comments. But again, in the efforts to keep this video a little bit shorter, I'll I'll refrain from giving too many of my thoughts on Super Metroid. Just know that, yes, the mechanics hold up well, the atmosphere is incredible in Super Metroid, there's lots of aspects about it that I like, but multiple times my momentum would be completely halted by a roadblock that would oftentimes take me literal hours of not playing the game to pass on multiple different playthroughs. And it's not that I'm not a Metroid guy, because I liked 2 other Metroid games and they appeared much higher on this list. I beat this game on March 7th. It took me 8 hours of actually playing the game. I didn't include all the time I spent trying to research solutions. At number 27, I put Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, this time the arcade version once again. Like with the first TMNT game, I played it on the Cowabunga collection on the Switch. I don't really have a ton to say about Turtles in Time. It is quite similar to the first TMNT beat 'em up, except I think the bosses are a little bit better, the mechanics are a little bit better, like the different movesets and stuff for the Turtles are more unique, and obviously art style wise, it's very different. I think I actually do prefer the graphics in the first game. It's a very classic art style, obviously, but mechanically and all that stuff, I think Turtles in Time is better. And I think that's a pretty popular opinion, too. I beat this game on April 20th in about an hour. At number 26, I had Gunman Clive, which is actually the last game that I beat to count for this list. Gunman Clive was originally an indie game that was exclusive to the 3DS, and it has since come out on Steam since the 3DS eShop is now forever gone. It's from the development team that went on to create Extermination Force, and it is a spiritual successor to Mega Man. It takes a lot of inspiration from the Mega Man games, except Gunman Clive is set in an Old West setting. This game was awesome for the short hour that it was. I thought it was incredible. The level design was on point. The variety of enemies and mechanics in just a single hour was stellar. My one sole problem with this game, and I talked quite a bit about this on the podcast, is that there's one specific mechanic that really frustrates me. There was a mushroom in the game that allowed you to jump higher over certain gaps, and you had to use it on multiple occasions, and the timing for it was honestly just horrendous. Like, you had to actually hit the button for jump after the character had already left the mushroom, and that frustrated me a lot, and it got me stuck quite a bit. But after I overcame that obstacle, the rest of the game afterwards was great as well. This game has great boss fights and great levels and great mechanics, like I already mentioned before. For the sake of time, I'll leave it at that. I beat this game on December 10th in about an hour. At number 25, I have Beyond Blue, which is a very strange, I guess technically an indie game. It's like an underwater diving game where you're given like specific tasks that you'll have to do. In many of the different levels, you have to like track whales and track their patterns and their motions and stuff like that, all for research purposes is the idea. It's kind of hard to describe what happens in this game in such a short amount of time, but all you really need to know is it's pretty realistic. It's a underwater oceanography thing, and it's very educational too. There were a lot of like side movies and stuff, like short movies that you could watch, all related to some of the animals that you were tracking in the game. I thought it was relatively strong mechanically and also quite interesting narratively, and I'm definitely somebody that likes to learn about a lot of sciencey stuff, and so learning about new oceanography things seemed pretty interesting. So it's pretty different from any other game I played this year, but it was quite fun. I definitely would recommend it. It was free on Epic at one point, that's how I got it. I don't think it's free there anymore though. I beat this game on June 14th in about 2 hours, 45 minutes. At number 24, we have Mario Kart Super Circuit. This is probably my favorite Mario Kart game that I've played so far. I played it, obviously, on the Switch Online service, and I wouldn't really want to play it on the handheld, but playing it on the Switch in TV mode, I thought it was a lot of fun. I think Super Circuit has some of the best tracks in the series, and I really like how, in a lot of ways, it's very similar to Super Mario Kart, but in others, it's more similar to Mario Kart 64. I think it's a really neat and unique blend of the two games, both of which I had a lot of fun with when I played them. Mario Kart Super Circuit was one of the few Mario Kart games that I was not really exposed to at all until recently, and so it was pretty surprising for me to go in and learn just how different and how fantastic it is. I was really blown away. I would definitely recommend Mario Kart Super Circuit to everybody because it's on the Switch Online service, so if you're burned out on Mario Kart World or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or whatever it is you're playing, definitely try Super Circuit. It has some great tracks. It's pretty easy to 100% pretty quickly. It's mechanically quite easy, so it's pretty friendly. Wasn't too hard, and that's usually how I like Mario Kart. I beat this game on January 19th in about 3 hours. Coming in at number 3, I have Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. This is a pretty old indie game at this point, and it's one of Hazelight's first games. It might actually be their very first game. I'm not entirely sure. This was also the first game that I beat on the Switch 2. When I got the Switch 2, I wanted to buy a couple of indie games on it, because I had just set up my Deku Deals app for the first time, and Brothers was one of the games that was on sale for pretty cheap, so I bought it, I played it, and I thought it was awesome. It's a really unique puzzle game that has an interesting narrative, and it does it without the use of any words or text, which is pretty impressive. I know a lot of people found the game to be pretty impactful. I was really more there just for the fun mechanics, the fun puzzles, and it was one of the earlier ones in a year of me playing quite a few indie games. One of my favorite aspects about this game is how you control each of the two brothers with different analog sticks. That's obviously very unique. Very few other games out there do that. And that's honestly what I have to say about most things about this game. You know, it's very unique, and not most other games do it. Like, that's honestly, as crazy as it sounds, that's really what I felt almost every moment playing this game. It's great. We're really to the territory now where with every game coming up, I have very few complaints, if any, because 2025 was a very strong year for me in games, and so it's pretty competitive up there at the top, but we'll get there. Stay tuned. I beat Brothers on June 13th in 2 hours, 45 minutes. At number 22, I have Final Fantasy, the first one. I had tried to finish this game a few different times, a couple of times last year and once back even in 2023, but this year was the year that I finally got around to it, and I thought this game was awesome. In some aspects, Final Fantasy 1 definitely does feel outdated, antiquated, you could say, but there's other things that it does great, and really at the end of the day, Final Fantasy 1, along with like Dragon Quest, the earlier Dragon Quest games, were really the blueprint for RPGs moving forward, especially the turn-based ones. Obviously, I have immense respect for this game, and I also think it's pretty good, even in 2025. I think it's definitely something everybody should try playing. I know everybody lauds Final Fantasy VI, and I definitely want to get there at some point, but just having played the earlier ones, I think Final Fantasy 1 is awesome. I thought it was kind of cool how much it leaned into traditional fantasy stereotypes, or I guess I should say tropes and motifs. And yes, the game maybe lacks some of its own identity as a result, but I still found it to be pretty fun, pretty entertaining. I loved the battle system. You know, obviously the story is nothing to be too impressed by, but overall, obviously I have a lot of respect for the game, and I think it's quite fun as well. I beat this game on February 4th in about 13 hours. At number 21, I have Sonic Generations. Sonic Generations was one of the earlier games that I played on the Switch 2 as well, because obviously with no 3D Mario game at launch and still a few weeks until Bonanza, I was really itching for a platformer on the Switch 2. And Sonic Generations was much better than I expected it to be. In the past, every experience that I've had with Sonic, I've not really enjoyed too much, but I wanted to give Sonic Generations a chance anyway, because I knew that it was a little bit different than most of the Sonic games I'd played, and it was also one of the most beloved. And I'm glad that I did give Sonic Generations a chance, because it's in fact quite an awesome game. My favorite aspect of Sonic Generations is that every other level changes in style. So you'll play a 2D level with classic Sonic, followed by a 3D level with modern Sonic, and so on through the entire game. I thought both types of levels were very strong. I think I preferred the 2D levels to the 3D levels, but it's pretty close. I think both levels were quite good. I don't think that this Sonic game suffers quite as much as a lot of them do with the whole idea of missing aspects of levels because Sonic is so fast. That's one of my main complaints with the Sonic series as a whole, is that Sonic moves so fast that you don't get to enjoy the levels, and it's often pretty difficult to play the levels because it's difficult to control Sonic. I don't think Sonic Generations has that problem, and that was a lot of why I liked it. I beat this game on June 21st, took me about 6.5 hours. We have now arrived at number 20, which means that from this point forward, every game is in the upper half of my list. At number 20, I have The Last of Us. Obviously, The Last of Us is a very well-known, very well-loved game. Obviously, it's most known for its story, and I've said multiple times, even in just this video, that story is not usually the main factor for me in video games, and that's definitely true, even in The Last of Us. But the story in The Last of Us is obviously so stellar that I still think the game is very much elevated by its story. The main reason why The Last of Us was able to get so high was that the gameplay was also pretty good. I'm generally not a big fan of shooters, but The Last of Us and Uncharted, and obviously other games that Naughty Dog has made, are pretty solid in their mechanics. I actually think they're pretty well made for the most part. I obviously played the PS5 remake of The Last of Us, so I can't speak to the original version. I know some Naughty Dog games, their original versions are pretty glitchy. I can't speak to any of that because I played the remake, and I would recommend most people do the same. It seems like definitely the best version. I don't really have a ton else to say about The Last of Us because it's so story-focused, so I'll just wrap up with the fact that I beat it on February 22nd in about 13 hours, 45 minutes. At number 19, I have Splatoon 2. This year, I started playing through all the Splatoon games after we found out about Splatoon Raiders. That is probably coming out next year. It could also be 2027. We actually don't know a whole lot of details yet. But I've been wanting to play the Splatoon games for a while, and I saw that as a good excuse. Splatoon 2, like the first game, has very unique levels. Every level is different. Now, actually, I shouldn't say every level is different, but most levels are different. Generally speaking, you have a new mechanic just about every level. The mechanics that are there are very creative, and honestly, I think a lot of it is the atmosphere, the art style, the smoothness of the mechanics, but Splatoon is just a really fun game as far as the single-player campaign goes. I am really not interested in the online for Splatoon. I played a little bit of the online for Splatoon 3, never played the online for Splatoon 2, and the online doesn't even exist anymore for Splatoon 1. So Splatoon, I play Splatoon differently than most people because I just play single-player campaigns, and I think they're pretty good. I'm not a big fan of shooter campaigns, generally speaking. Obviously, Splatoon is quite different already, and its campaign is very different as well. In fact, it feels more like a 3D platformer than it does a shooter game. I think on a lot of levels that's by design. My biggest frustration with Splatoon, or specifically with Splatoon 2, is that when you're out of the levels, you're in hub areas. Each world has its own hub area. And for some reason, they decided to hide the levels around the hub areas. So especially in the later worlds, it can be very difficult sometimes to find or to get to the levels. So you'll be doing this like pointless, time-consuming, monotonous platforming to actually get to the levels, particularly in the last world, and I found that to be very frustrating. Otherwise, though, Splatoon 2 is an awesome game. I beat it on November 16th in about 7.5 hours. At number 18, we have The Ware Cleaner, which was my favorite indie game I played this year. And it's very strange and very unique in many different ways. The general premise of The Ware Cleaner is you go through levels as a werewolf at night who is a janitor cleaning up an office building. And throughout the game, you're trying to stop the security guard from discovering that you're a werewolf. I thought the game was completely ridiculous and just stupid fun. On some level, it kind of falls into one of those cleaning game categories, but at the same time, there's quite a bit more to it. If you walk into a room, whether there's a mess there or not, and the werewolf stays within a human in the office for long enough, it will automatically go to eat the person. And then you have to clean up the body, which costs you time, and you are timed on how long it takes you to clean up the messes. For 100% completion, you can opt to try to complete every level without killing anybody as well, which means you have to be really careful about where you go and how you time things based on paths that people in the office take. I didn't really go that far with it. I mostly just did the levels, collected some things along the way, and wrapped it up. I didn't feel the need to do all the extra stuff, but it seems like the kind of thing that I could potentially return to at some point and try, because it was really fun, and it doesn't really seem too difficult or too daunting to do those extra challenges. This is another USC published game from college students, and I believe it's still free, so I would definitely recommend it to everybody. I beat The Ware Cleaner on June 14th in about an hour. At number 17, I have Final Fantasy II. So I know most people probably prefer Final Fantasy I to Final Fantasy II. The main complaint around Final Fantasy II I mostly agree with, and that is that the leveling system makes absolutely zero sense. Rather than leveling up characters, you level up each different move and each weapon they use individually, including their HP and their mana. And I think, honestly, the leveling system is dumb. However, I think the story and the characters in Final Fantasy II, along with the different setting, like the different towns and stuff that you find, is a lot better in Final Fantasy II. It's far more fleshed out, and I think it's a big step up from Final Fantasy I on all of those aspects. Otherwise, the two games are very similar, and it's a minor preference, me liking Final Fantasy II. I beat Final Fantasy II on February 20th in about 20 hours. Number 16, I have Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards. Kirby 64, like Kirby's Adventure and Kirby's Dream Land 3, which for those who have watched a lot of the podcast or of my channel, you guys will know that those are some of my favorite 2D platformers. Kirby 64 is right up there with those games. My favorite part about Kirby 64 is that you can stack Kirby's copy abilities. So you can actually have 2 copy abilities at the same time, which will combine to make a totally new ability. Rarely do Kirby games have a new gameplay gimmick that changed the way you play the game so dramatically. There were some awesome new abilities too, including the knockoff lightsaber that Kirby gets by fusing a sword ability with a fire ability. I didn't really engage with the collectibles, but I liked the level design, I liked the new gimmick, and I'm generally just a pretty big fan of Kirby to begin with. Strangely, the levels were pretty easy and the boss fights were very difficult, which was somewhat annoying, but also a welcome challenge at the same time. I beat this game on Switch Online on February 18th in about 4 hours, 15 minutes. Number 15, I have Metroid Zero Mission. Now yes, I know that I put Super Metroid all the way back at number 28, and yes, I do actually think Metroid Zero Mission is a much better game than Super Metroid, and I'm willing to die on this hill. I had a lot more fun with Metroid Zero Mission, and it was the game after 4 failed attempts at Super Metroid that finally got me into the Metroid series. Some people say Zero Mission is a bit too hand-holdy. That's fine. At least it's actually good. I thought Zero Mission was better than Super Metroid in almost every aspect. I thought the music was better. I thought the art style was better. I thought the mechanics felt smoother. It gave you hints on where to go, which were much appreciated. Overall, I much preferred Metroid Zero Mission to Super Metroid, and I'd love to make a full video on this at some point about my unique Metroid opinions, but I'd like to beat all of the games first. So yes, I know this is an unpopular opinion, but I put Zero Mission at 15. I beat this game on February 18th on Switch Online in about 5 hours, 15 minutes. At number 14, I have Spider-Man Miles Morales, the second game in the Spider-Man trilogy. Miles Morales is one I've heard a lot of people say is better than the first Spider-Man game, and in some ways I can agree. Miles Morales is far more condensed, and in a lot of ways the system UI is improved. But I felt that the story in Miles Morales was kind of dumb. I'm not going to actually get into the story because I don't want to spoil anything, but especially the back half of the story just was not all that interesting. And generally speaking, I didn't find the collectibles to be as good in Miles Morales either. That said, I did do all the collectibles in Miles Morales, which I did not do in the first Spider-Man game. So, I'll say what I want, I guess. Just like with all the Spider-Man games, which I'll talk about more later, the combat, the web slinging, all of these things are on point. The Spider-Man games from Insomniac are some of the best games out there, and I strongly recommend all 3 of them. But Miles Morales is probably my least favorite. I beat this game on January 4th, having 100% completed it, and it took me about 12 hours, 15 minutes. Coming in at number 13, I have the first Spider-Man game, Marvel's Spider-Man. I played the remastered version included with Miles Morales on the PS5. I had known about this game for years, and I had always wanted to play it, but when I started playing it, I realized just how crazy smooth and crazy fun the web slinging and the combat are in the Spider-Man games. Few games are as well polished, I think, that aren't made by Nintendo, as Insomniac Spider-Man games. And the first Spider-Man game shows it to perfection. I did all the stuff in the story, and I did as much post-game content as I could, but there were just a couple of things in the first Spider-Man game for post-game content that I didn't like. I liked most of the collectibles, the backpacks, the landmarks, all of those things, but I didn't really like the combat challenges that they gave, because I didn't feel like the objectives were all that interesting, and it got pretty repetitive pretty quickly. Unlike with a lot of games, I think Marvel's Spider-Man was a game that was greatly helped by its open world. I'm usually not a huge fan of open worlds, and overall, I thought it was a fantastic game. It also helps that I'm a Spider-Man fan, but even if you're not, this game's incredible. I beat Marvel's Spider-Man technically last year, but it was after my ranking video came out for last year, so I counted it for this year. So I beat it on December 30th, 2024, and I finished the DLC on the 31st. In total, it took me about 27 hours, 45 minutes. At number 12, we have Splatoon on the Wii U. I echo a lot of the same sentiment that I already shared for Splatoon 2. I think every level in Splatoon 1 implements a new mechanic. Each time, it's super creative and super fun. The main differences between Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 1 are that Splatoon 1 is better. It's more creative, it's more unique, it's more fresh, obviously because Splatoon 2 didn't exist yet, and the hub world problem that I mentioned earlier isn't nearly as big of an issue in Splatoon 1. Besides that, the games are remarkably similar, with the only extra difference being that Splatoon 1 is a novelty because it's on the Wii U, and I don't really play a whole lot of stuff on the Wii U anymore, so that was kind of cool. That's really all I have to say about Splatoon 1, though. It was a lot of fun. It was my introduction to Splatoon, other than like maybe a little bit of an hour or something that I played on Splatoon 3. But yeah, I can't recommend this game more. It's fantastic. One of the strongest games I played this year. I beat it on July 9th in about 4 hours. Coming in at number 11, just barely not making its way into the top 10, we have Kirby and the Forgotten Land. I played the Switch 2 edition with the Starcrossed world included. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is an awesome 3D platformer. Kirby feels like he so naturally moves into a 3D space, and it feels like very few changes had to have been made to the core Kirby formula to make a 3D game. Kirby and the Forgotten Land came out obviously a few years ago on the Switch 1, and I didn't play it back then because I was not into Kirby games at the time. But in retrospect, coming back on the Switch 2 with the game running smoothly in 60 frames per second and looking incredible, I thought Kirby and the Forgotten Land was awesome. My only problem ended up being that after the main game, the post-game world and the Starcrossed worlds were significantly worse in quality than the entire rest of the game before it. I felt like both the post-game world and the Starcrossed world had collectibles that didn't feel as natural. I felt like they were just placed around just for the sake of being collectible. Whereas in the main game, I felt like most of the collectibles seemed to have their place in the levels, and as though the levels were originally designed partly around them. In the Starcrossed world and in the post-game level, I cannot say that that is the case. It feels like they're a little shoehorned in. And I originally was going to completely 100% this game, get all the collectibles and all the levels, get all the trophies, all this extra stuff, but then I kind of lost all motivation to 100% it after I saw how bad, or in comparatively bad, the post-game and the DLC was to the main game. Overall, though, still a fun game. I beat it on September 10th in a total of about 16 and a half hours. Making its way into the top 10, we have Infamous. Infamous is an open-world game on the PS3 where you play as either a superhero or a supervillain. It's your choice. You have electric powers, and honestly, I'm not even entirely sure why I liked this game so much. I think it was mostly the zaniness and the progression of abilities. I really liked how new abilities were unlocked and how easily you could upgrade your own abilities. It was another one like Spider-Man of the open world games that I think the open world significantly added to the experience, because I liked doing all the side quests and things before I got around to doing the main story. And so I did do almost everything in Infamous. I nearly 100%ed it. There were a couple things here and there I didn't do, but I basically 100%ed it. I did just about everything. Infamous was great. I thought the story was compelling. I really liked the way that you have 3 different distinctive areas that open up at different points throughout the game, and you honestly don't even know it when you start. Like, honestly, I started approaching the end of the first area, and I was like, wow, this is a pretty short game, and I realized it was this short, and then, boom, there's a whole new area, and then a third one. Like, it honestly kind of surprises you when it opens up. And I really liked the loop of opening up new areas on the map based on completing objectives in said areas. And I also really liked the idea of the city's power being shut off, and you, at different points, needing to traverse through sections where you don't have access to your powers and you're significantly weakened. I thought it was an awesome game. I beat it on May 4th in about 18 and a half hours. Alright, I'm a little bit worried about number 9. I'm kind of worried that the last people are gonna leave the video now after hearing that I put Metroid Fusion at number 9. Hey, look, I know. All of the Super Metroid fans out there, even the Metroid Zero Mission fans out there, they're all trying to get my head on a pike, and I get it. I know people don't like Metroid Fusion, But for me, Metroid Fusion is the best of the 3 Metroid games that I've played, because I like the movement better in Metroid Fusion. Metroid Fusion is more fast-paced, there's less wandering around trying to figure out where to go. It's pretty straightforward, it tells you where to go, and that's kind of my style of game here. I really liked Metroid Fusion because of its linearity. I know a lot of people complain about Metroid Fusion's linearity. I really enjoyed Metroid Fusion's linearity. I loved the idea of knowing where to go. I didn't know exactly what to do in each area. They didn't tell you everything, but I had at least a good idea of what I was supposed to do based on where I was supposed to go. The boss fights in Fusion are the best of the 3 games. The movement in Fusion is the best of the 3 games. I liked the mechanic with doors opening based on switches you press rather than different types of missiles. I loved Samus's new suit for the game, and I liked the story and the general atmosphere of Metroid Fusion. The soundtrack is also way better because it's more upbeat and more exciting than Super Metroid or Metroid Zero Mission before. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I'm a huge Metroid Fusion fan, and I already want to replay the game, even though I just beat it on February 20th in about 7 hours. I didn't expect to be putting a Game Boy game this high, but here we are with Donkey Kong 94 at number 8. Donkey Kong 94 is probably the best puzzle game, if you don't count Zelda games, that I've ever played. I absolutely loved the puzzle platforming mechanics of Donkey Kong 94. The funny thing is, I'm not even really that big a fan of Donkey Kong, the arcade game, but Donkey Kong 94 is quite the departure from that game. For those who aren't familiar, Donkey Kong 94 is basically the game that Mario vs. Donkey Kong was inspired by. So it's very similar to that, and I definitely want to play the Mario and Donkey Kong series after playing this game, because this game is incredible. New mechanics were being introduced all the time. The difficulty balancing was perfect. I felt like I struggled somewhat on a lot of the levels, but I wasn't there for, more than 15 minutes on a single level. I enjoyed almost every single thing about Donkey Kong 94. I think it's an amazing game. I think it's the best game on the Game Boy, other than maybe Super Mario Land 2, because that's also really good. But otherwise, it's definitely the best game on the Game Boy. I think it's actually better than Link's Awakening, or at least better than the Game Boy version of Link's Awakening. Donkey Kong 94 is incredible. I don't really have many other ways to describe it, other than it's a great puzzle platformer, and the best game on the Game Boy. I beat this game on March 30th in about 3 hours, 45 minutes. At number 7, I have another game that I technically beat last year. I beat it on Christmas Day, 2024, the day that I got the PS5, and that game is Astro's Playroom. Now, I intended to play Astro Bot this year, and had I, it probably would have been somewhere in the top 5, because from what I played of Astro Bot is absolutely incredible. But Astro's Playroom is really good too. And the crazy thing is I know multiple people who own PS5s and have not played Astro's Playroom, and I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Astro's Playroom is literally one of the best games ever made, and it's totally free with a PS5. It's crazy. Astro's Playroom, although short, has so many cool, unique ideas, so much so that they had to make a whole new game to suit their creativity. I loved every level in Astro's Playroom. I loved the level where you climb with the monkey. I loved the level where you control the ball monkey ball style. I loved the one where you fly in a UFO. And I loved the final boss as well. Astro's Playroom was a nod to PlayStation history, though not as much as Astro Bot, obviously, while also being a super creative 3D platformer, pure fun, and a great demonstration for what the PS5 controller can do. Astro's Playroom. Astro Bot's also good. Astro's Playroom is incredible, and I loved every second of it. I beat the game in about 3 hours on Christmas Day 2024. It was a shame that this game could not be in the top 5 by the very nature of a top 5, but number 6 is Yakuza 0 Director's Cut. My introduction to the Yakuza series, and one of the first games I played on the Switch 2. I had been wanting to get into Yakuza for a little while, and I had played the first hour or so of Yakuza 0 when I found out that Director's Cut was coming to Switch 2 on launch day, and I was excited. I picked up the game in July, and had a blast. It took me about 31 and a half hours to beat, and I didn't finish it until October 5th, due to marching band and school starting up, but I loved every moment of it. Obviously, the narrative in Yakuza is great. It is super zany, super crazy, super weird, in all the best ways. And the combat is some of the most fun I've had in any video game. I loved Yakuza 0, and it was the game that got me into the Yakuza series. We have now made it to the top 5, and one of these games had to be in the top 5. So at number 5, I have Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 is my personal favorite of the 3 Spider-Man games. I loved the combination of Miles and Peter into a single game, and I loved the idea that I could play each of them at different points through the story. Each character had their own advantages and disadvantages, and at different points in the story, it became more advantageous to play as one over the other. The story, too, was the strongest in any of the Spider-Man games yet, with quite a few twists and turns that I did not expect. Spider-Man 2 was a fantastic conclusion to the trilogy of Spider-Man games that I marathoned through in just a short 2 months. And I'm definitely excited for any future Spider-Man games and Insomniac's upcoming Wolverine game. Mechanically, this game is as strong as any of the other Spider-Man games, maybe stronger, and it makes quite a few new additions while also having an expanded world map and way more content, almost all of which was immaculate. I beat this game on January 13th with 100% completion in about 24 hours. At number 4, a game that I really wanted to put in my top 3, but unfortunately I could not. That game is Yakuza Kiwami, which I completed very recently on December 5th, and it took me about 27 hours to do so. Anybody who's beat this game will know that 27 hours is pretty long, and that's because I did so much extra content in Yakuza Kiwami, and I probably would have done more if it wasn't December and I didn't need to get this video out. Yakuza Kiwami, I think overall, actually has a weaker story beat to beat than Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, and mechanically they're about the same. But I feel that all of the extra content and the side quests in Kiwami are better, and it's a shorter, more bite-sized experience. I did way more extra stuff in Kiwami, and I still spent a little bit less time than I did in Director's Cut. Director's Cut also felt distracted at times because it was following 2 different stories, and both stories were compelling, don't get me wrong, but at times it was a little bit hard to follow because you would go so long not playing one of the stories. For that reason, I did prefer Kiwami to Yakuza 0. I do also have Kiwami 2, but unfortunately I didn't have time this year to finish it, so that'll be a next year game, and it'll definitely be pretty high on the list, I would imagine, for next year. So I'm definitely excited to get into that, and I'm also excited to play Yakuza Kiwami 3, also on Switch 2, when that comes out next February. I really loved the way that Kiwami picked up the story that Yakuza 0 Director's Cut had, and I'm excited to see where things go from here, as a new Yakuza fan. At number 3, we are now getting to the games that defined my year of gaming in 2025. At number 3, I have Persona 3 Reload. This game is extraordinarily long. It took me an entire 79 hours, and yet almost every single hour of this game was phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of RPGs, particularly turn-based RPGs, and Persona 3 Reload had a great combat system and a compelling narrative, all while having the things that make the Persona series so special, the social links and the Japanese setting. I am newly a Persona fan, and I wish to play Persona 5 at some point next year, and Persona 4 Royal, or Reload, or whatever it's called, when that comes out, hopefully next year, but more likely 2027. At first, Persona 3 seemed incredibly daunting, being so long, but it has now kind of opened my mind to the idea of playing these very long RPGs, and I wish to play more in the future. Persona 3 Reload was a fantastic game, and it's the longest game I played this year, so it has definitely a big impact on what exactly I did this year in gaming. I beat this game on April 15th, like I said, in 79 hours. At number 2, I have the other game that I technically beat in 2024, and that game is The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, which I beat on December 31st of 2024, so I did indeed beat it in its launch year. So I don't want to hear it from any of you folks, that are going to tell me that I should have played the new Zelda game in its launch year. Echoes of Wisdom is not just monumental for the Zelda series because it's the first game that features Zelda as the playable character, other than the CDI one. It's also revolutionary because it takes the open world freedom from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and puts them into a 2D space. I was not a huge fan of the open world and player choice in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but I absolutely loved it in Echoes of Wisdom. I thought it was implemented much better, and I did a lot more exploration in the 2D game than I did in the 3D ones, which is kind of funny. I loved the way that the map opens up in Echoes of Wisdom. I love the idea of being able to go off in all different directions, and I thought it was great finally having another 2D Zelda game after all of these years. Playing as Zelda honestly doesn't make a huge difference in how I approached 2D Zelda, but I did kind of like the new Echo mechanic. It definitely created some unique moments in the game. Like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, everybody has stories about their experience with Echoes of Wisdom, including what Echo they used most, what their go-to Echo enemy was to fight bad guys, and what order they went to the dungeons in. I loved every moment of Echoes of Wisdom. It's my favorite 2D Zelda game I've played, and probably my second favorite Zelda game that I've played. I know there are a lot of people that were not quite as positive on it, and that's fine, but I thought it was fantastic, and I definitely want to replay it sometime in 2026. Potentially on live stream. Like I mentioned before, I beat this game on December 31st, in about 19 hours, 45 minutes. Well, we have finally made it to my favorite game that I played in 2025. If you know me, you definitely know what game this is. And even if you don't know me, I think there's a pretty good shot that you can make a guess based on what kinds of other games appeared on this list as to what my number one game is. Without further ado, my game of the year is Donkey Kong Bonanza. Donkey Kong Bonanza makes a strong case at being the ultimate collectathon, only rivaled by, in my opinion, Mario 64. I collected every last thing in Bonanza. I did every Bonandium gem. I got every fossil in every area, and I even collected every music disc to complete the soundtrack, just so I could get that 100% completion. I collected every costume, every hair dye for Donkey Kong. I completed this game, and I completed it with a capital C. Donkey Kong Bonanza is absolutely incredible. It on its own is worth buying a Switch 2, in my opinion. I was so excited. I'll never forget my excitement when watching the Switch 2 presentation, when they showed off Donkey Kong Bonanza. And I knew immediately that it was the Mario team that was working on it. And the funny thing is that I wasn't really that big a fan of Mario Odyssey. I've talked about this lots of times on the show. I don't think Mario Odyssey was that good because so many moons were repeated. And yes, so many bananas are repeated in Bonanza, but I still think the game is stronger. I think the areas are stronger. I think the mechanics and the game feel are stronger. And while yes, there are still some repetitive bananas here and there, I don't think it's quite as egregious or quite as many as Odyssey. That said, I loved Odyssey on my initial playthrough and came to hate it later on, so maybe Bonanza will sour for me over time, but I doubt it. This game is incredible. Right now, it's quite possibly my third or fourth favorite game of all time, only behind Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, and maybe Galaxy. But it is right up there with the best of the best. I absolutely love Donkey Kong Bonanza. I was at first worried that the Mario team was doing Donkey Kong instead, and I'm now elated that they did Donkey Kong instead of Mario. I absolutely loved Donkey Kong Bonanza. I loved the different layers. I loved getting each and every last banana. I loved the plot twists towards the end, which I did not expect from a Donkey Kong game. I loved all the callbacks to the Donkey Kong Country games, and even to the Donkey Kong arcade game. And most of all, I loved that the Switch 2 finally had a good exclusive. Oh, Mario Kart World, take that, take that, take that. There are some performance issues here and there with Donkey Kong Bonanza, I'm not gonna lie. But that does not hold back the game from near perfection, in my opinion. I wrapped up Donkey Kong Bonanza, having spent 52 hours and 15 minutes in the world, September 17th. Well, I guess that does it, folks. Thanks all for watching this video, and thanks for all of the immense support that you've given me this year. 2025 was an incredible year for me, both on YouTube and in video games. I put a lot of thought into this video, and I've been planning it for over a month, and I hope it's turned out well. If you've liked it, then make sure to give it a like, and comment what kinds of things I could do better on the next video, because there definitely will be more like this. While you're down below the video, check out the links in the description to my Discord server and my other channels, and of course, the Not Just Nintendo podcast, where you can hear more specific thoughts about each game after I beat them. Almost every game on this list I've talked about at some point or another on the podcast, so be sure to go check that out. With all that said, happy holidays to you all, and I'll catch you guys next year. Goodbye.